Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Early Childhood Family Network webinar, Honoring One's Potential Every Day with Stories, or SMART, a blueprint for creating connections. I'd like to turn it over to David Armstrong.
Thank you, Katia. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. This webinar is hosted by the National Early Childhood Family Network and FREDLA, a partner in the National TA Network for Children's Behavioral Health, operated by and coordinated through the University of Maryland. This presentation was prepared for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, SAMHSA, under the contract with SAMHSA. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The views, opinions, and contents of this publication are those of the author and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of SAMHSA or HHS. Welcome to the National Early Childhood Family Network educational webinar for engaging parents and professionals as we work together on our vision to live in a world where all children birth to age are safe, healthy, and inspired to lifelong learning. Next slide, please. In February 2018, 55 family members who are connected to the launch grantees gathered at SAMHSA for a Family Leadership Summit and committed to creating a National Early Childhood Family Network, better known as NECFN. Since February, family members across the country have been meeting virtually to turn their visions into reality. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Our mission. The National Early Childhood Family Network is a network of families and agencies committed to increasing awareness of early childhood experiences by providing resources and training to families of young children. We aim to bring families together locally and nationally to increase our collective voices and to advocate for policies and educational research that promotes the well-being of young children and their families, regardless of race, religion, or socioeconomic status. What I would like to do right now is to present to you a short video from the Early National Childhood Network Family Leadership Summit.
Okay, everyone, before we play the video, I just want to give out some directions for our folks that are connected by telephone. If you are connected to the audio by telephone, you want to go ahead and mute your telephones and set your telephones down and then unmute your computer speakers. The directions are also in the notes pod. So again, if you are connected by telephone, please go ahead and mute your telephone, go ahead and set down the telephones and unmute your computer speakers. The video will play through your computer speakers. So I'll give everyone about 5 to 10 seconds or so to get connected, and then we'll go ahead and move forward with the video.
Most of it is that we all started by telling our story. And so when you tell your story, think of the role that you want, whoever's listening to it. Craft your story, because each of you have a powerful story.
Project Launch is very important to our children. With my grandson, that there were more grandsons, more kids like him and stuff. So I became a parent leader to be able to gather knowledge. Knowledge is power.
With my own daughter, I was powerless because she was struggling.
Nobody has a right to tell me or tell any child in the world that you do not have solutions.
I was always being told, you discipline at home, you discipline in school.
And we built a network, we built a coalition within the school, and we unseated the board and took over the school. But then you translate that into creating a movement to affect change on the community level.
We set out to create this forum for family leaders to come together and really explore what does it take to lead, who are you as a leader.
The first question is always not what's your vision, it's what is your mission.
We want to equip families to have knowledge and skill to deal with social emotional development.
Being able to take the perspective of the child and carry that through.
I engage parents and family on their level, not my level.
Locking in those networks.
Action-oriented. In your helpful network, you need to have purpose.
Advocacy really is, how does it make you feel?
You need to have clear goals.
We made a list of things that we're going to need to purchase, supplies.
And you need to make sure you have the right team, like the right people on the bus. But we want parents in their story, but I want a parent who's a grant writer. We need to maximize our family members for that other thing that they have. A lot of us parents are all trying to do the same thing individually. And you may have the idea, this person may have the details, and this person may know how to get the money, this other person may be good at getting feet on the ground. And as you use and you bring all these people together,
You will be infinitely more powerful.
open up your text.
What one word, what do we want for our young children? Type that in.
And people said that we were nobody. But when we came together,
Okay, so for everyone who is connected by telephone, you want to go ahead and place your computers back on mute and then pick back up your telephone. So go ahead and place your computer back on mute and pick back up your telephone. And so I'll give everyone about 5 to 10 seconds or so to get connected. And then once we are connected, I will pass it off to Donna to introduce our speakers for today. All right, Donna, take it away when you're ready.
Good afternoon. Now it's time to hear from our two presenters today. Susan Graham from Let's Build It is a national speaker, trainer, and coach focusing on child services system reform efforts. As an executive director with the John Maxwell team, Susan develops transformational leaders and teams. Susan holds degrees in social work, criminal justice, and women's studies. Nan Arnstein is the CEO and founder of Creative Arts for Developing Minds, Inc., based on her personal experience as a foster child. Nan advocates for children in foster care by providing combined music, art, and movement experiential activities. She holds degrees in music, education, and accounting. Susan and Nan, over to you.
So thank you very much and for that wonderful introduction. I am Susan Graham, and we're really excited to have an opportunity to spend some time with you talking about 3 of my favorite topics: children, family engagement, and leadership. So Nan, what are we going to talk about today?
Good afternoon. My name is Nan, and I'm also very happy to be here. Our 3 main goals for today, and these are all in keeping with the mission of the National Early Childhood Family Network's mission. Objective number 1 is to understand a 3-step strategy that establishes effective family engagement. Our second goal is to identify and better understand the differences between communication and connection, and how true connection is the key to family engagement. And our final objective is to understand how stories are an effective tool to affect transformational change and to understand the story SMART process. Are we ready?
I think we're ready. So becoming a champion for change. You know, although we'll be talking about family engagement and family leadership today, Nan and I have decided that we're going to use the word champion instead of leader throughout this webinar. And we have purposefully chosen this word because we believe that change or transformation requires a couple of things. It requires a shared vision, shared values, and most of all, a shared language. Nan, could you speak to some of the confusion that we've experienced when we use the word leader and leadership?
I'd be happy to. I've experienced this confusion between leader and leadership in the corporate environment, where I spent 25 years working as a CPA and the CFO of 2 multi-million-dollar companies in human services and among parents and youth. Too often we confuse the word leadership with management. I believe there is a difference. Managers are often good people and the role of management is necessary. But not all managers are leaders. Managers produce results. Managers work within existing constraints and conditions. They operate within the way things are. They tend to just check the boxes and follow the process.
So, Nan, how is leadership different?
Leaders challenge the way things are. They solve problems. They create change. It's important to remember that one does not have to have a position or title to be a leader. Anyone and everyone can be a leader.
So the 3 points or takeaways that I'm understanding are, number 1, that there's a difference between leadership and management. Number 2, both are important and valuable, but the titles are not interchangeable. And number 3, position or title is not required to be a leader. You know, in the book, The 21 Laws of Leadership, my mentor, John Maxwell, defines leadership as influence. So when we're referring to champions for children, what we really are describing is any person who wants to influence the life of a child in a positive way.
Exactly.
When we use the definition of champion for children, it's really someone who wants to influence that child in a positive way, or any child in a positive way. And we quickly realize, looking at this funnel, that everyone that touches the life of a child can influence their outcome.
When we look at this funnel of champion examples, at the top we have the group of individuals. These are folks who are influencing their own children or a child close to them. They could be a parent, caregiver, foster parent, teacher, home visitor, healthcare professional. You get the point. On an individual level, anyone can influence the goal or outcome. The National Early Childhood Family Network vision to live in a world where all children birth to 8 are safe, healthy, and inspired to lifelong learning.
And Nan, we know that there are champions who often want to do more. Some champions also want to support a peer, while some champions will also have a desire to get involved in system transformation efforts. How often do we hear, you know, I don't want another parent or caregiver to have to struggle the same way that I've had to struggle. So when we consider engaging parents and caregivers, we must really remember to cast the net wide and to all, meeting people and supporting each other exactly where we are. You know, I really like this funnel because it reminds me that we are all in the same funnel. And sometimes I think we can easily overlook that, especially when we are tasked with engaging families to develop what we call family leaders.
As was mentioned earlier, I grew up in the foster care system, so I know the inside of that system because I lived it. Now with the work of my nonprofit, I'm working with children and caregivers and other people within the system. I wrote a book called Rocky Shores. It is the story of Charles Farmer. Charles is 9 years old and a veteran of the foster care system. The book was written for children between the ages of 8 and 12. However, there are many learnings for adults as well. As we know, there are many levels within any system. They all occur concurrently and all have equal value. It is a horizontal process, and it does take time.
So let's move on to our first objective, And this is what we call engagement RBI. Engagement RBI is a simple three-step strategy designed to build the conditions for family and quality engagement. This is a simple-to-learn strategy, simple to remember, but we know from experience it's often very hard to do. When we are talking about parent and caregiver engagement, what Nan and I have discovered is that these three steps will work not only when we're engaging families and caregivers, but they also work when we're trying to build a relationship with anyone.
Can I jump in here for a second,
Sure.
Susan? I truly agree. I rely on all three steps when I'm working with an individual child or a group of children. Also when engaging parents and caregivers. I also use these three engagement RBI steps when engaging with my board or meeting with a funder.
So that's one of the tools that we use to help us better engage with others is called the DISC personality assessment. And even though we don't have time to fully unpack this, we wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what the DISC styles are, because they really affect the way that we interact, create connection, and communicate with one another. You know, we all have a predominant personality and communication style. And even though we all have elements of all of these styles, we all tend to be kind of hardwired in one area more than another. So let's unpack these a little bit if we can. So starting with the D on the upper left-hand corner, this is the driver type. And the D makes up about 3% of the population. This would be someone, maybe like a Judge Judy or a Hillary Clinton comes to mind. These individuals are generally outgoing, they're very task-oriented, and they're usually very fast-paced. They're often very high energy and not necessarily interested in a lot of fine details. They are kind of those get-it-done type of people. So if we're engaging with someone who is a D style, we would want to make sure that we are direct and kind of get straight to the point.
In the upper right-hand quadrant, the I or influencer type makes up about 11% of the population. Someone like a Robin Williams or an Oprah Winfrey. They are outgoing, people-oriented, usually very friendly and upbeat. They are creative, inspirational, quick decision makers who like to tell stories and have fun. When engaging with an I style, we want to make sure they have enough time to talk and realize that they make decisions and process information by talking.
And sound like anyone you know, Nan?
Yes, very much so.
Moving down to the lower right-hand corner, we're talking about the S or the supportive style. And the supportive style makes up about 69% of the population. And this would be someone like a Michelle Obama. A cartoon character that always comes to mind for me as an S would be Charlie Brown. They are reserved and really people-oriented, very deliberate and slow-paced. The S or supportive types are great listeners. They're warm, they're caring, and they really tend to want to make sure that others' needs are met, even sometimes before their very own. So if we're engaging with a supportive personality style, we want to remember that the S type tends to avoid conflict. So we would want to make sure that the S person feels safe and supported and give them plenty of time and space to think and process.
The final style, C, or completer style, makes up about 17% of the population. Someone like a Bill Gates on one end of the spectrum and Sheldon Cooper on the opposite end. They are reserved, task-oriented, and usually moderately paced. The completer styles are analytical, they like facts, organization, and data. When engaging with a C style, we would want to provide specifics. This style pays attention to details, they are punctual and prepared.
Sounds like someone I know. When I became a DISC trainer and consultant, this really changed my life. The other day I was at the laundromat, and even watching individuals fold clothes gave me some insight of sort of how they were wired and a little bit about their personality, which is really helpful when you want to engage in, as we'll talk about later with communication and connection, find common ground with that person. But the way that this has helped me and changed my life the most is it really has helped me better connect with my children. Understanding their styles and how they're different from my own has really improved our communication as well as our relationship.
And Susan, doesn't quality engagement begin with building relationships? We use this baseball metaphor to remember the steps involved. An RBI, for any non-baseball fan, stands for run batted in. An RBI scores a run. In baseball, in order to score a run, all three bases must be tagged. The same is true for engagement. First base, or step one, is rapport. Second base, or step two, is to be service-minded. Third base is integrity. Susan, would you like to explain these three steps to us?
Absolutely. So on first base, which is rapport, I think the three words that really define rapport is know, like, and trust. Because building rapport with someone is all about building relationships. And the question that we should be asking ourselves when engaging with another individual, a parent, a caregiver, or even a child for that matter, is do they know me? Do they like me? And can they trust me? Because without those three elements, we really can't further or strengthen the relationship anymore. When we move on to second base is to be service-minded. And what are some of the questions that we might want to ask someone, or the questions that people are asking themselves when we reach out to them? And it really is, how can I help you? We want to get to know the other individual, hear their story, and understand who they are before we try to engage with them to tell them who we are. We want to get curious at that phase. We want to ask questions. We want to ask questions, especially when we're working with people who are unlike ourselves, until we can find a place of common ground. How often do we jump right in, especially in the provider realm, or we've had a provider jump right in and tell us what we need before they've taken the time to really find out what it is that our reality is or what it is that we want. So for me, I think that step two is the hardest place to stay, but we need to stay there to really build that relationship and build that sense of trust.
I agree completely. It explains that when we meet someone, we try to meet them where they are. Doesn't it make sense that if we're asking these questions, that they're probably asking themselves the same questions? Do they know me? Should I trust them? And can they really help me?
Exactly. And moving on to step three, it is only after we have built rapport, we have found common ground in our discovery, being service-minded phase, that we can move on to step three, which we call integrity. And the qualities of delivering with integrity is that people we're trying to engage must view us as someone who understands us and can actually help walk alongside us and support us. So if we are the engagers, we need to be responsive, we need to be capable, and we need to be competent. So in short, we must be the person, group, or organization that another person would want to engage with. I love this Larry Page quote that we always want to deliver and give more than we expect in return.
So in summary, the three steps of engagement, RBI, are rapport, know, like, and trust, be service-minded, how can I help you, and integrity, be responsive, capable, and competent.
Again, simple to say, very, very hard to do. because it has to be these 3 steps ongoing and always in that order. It's just like in baseball. You know, if we get thrown out at third base and we don't deliver with integrity and we violate someone's trust, we have to go back and build that. So we have to go back to first base and continue to reestablish rapport with that individual. I can't say enough. It's easy to say. It's so hard to do. Nan and I have learned that engagement is really a fluid process. And as relationships develop and we continue to round the bases, we are strengthening our engagement and relationship every single time. But we must really be intentional around the process if we're going to build strong relationships.
Let's move on to learning objective number 2, connections. Susan and I both strongly believe there are differences between communication and connection. In this section, we want to share with you 5 connecting principles and 5 connecting practices. These principles and practices come from the teachings of leadership expert John Maxwell and are explained in his book, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect.
So let's start with 5 connecting principles, sort of the foundation, and they are influence, others, communicating, energy, and skill. So principle number 1 says that connecting increases your influence in every situation. And if you remember, we talked about leadership being influence. So in order to influence another and to lead others, we want to make sure that we're caring about people as well as deliverables. How often have I felt as like a parent being sort of tokenized or a checkbox to somebody else's deliverable when I really want someone to care about me, my family, and my story? We also want to make sure that to connect with others that we're seeking advice from all interested parties. Those closest to the situation certainly understand the situation best, and valuing that experience is really important. And then we want to actively listen, not listen only to respond, but listen to really hear and understand what the person is saying and be willing to ask clarifying questions when we don't understand.
Principle number 2 is that connecting is all about others and not ourselves. We do this at many different levels. On a one-on-one basis, we want to make sure that everyone feels valued and that they're important to the conversation. In a group situation, what makes sense is to identify the strengths of each person. And when assigning tasks or asking for volunteers, we hope to be able to latch on to the strengths of that person. And if we're presenting to an audience, it's critical to appreciate that audience, thank them for their time and attention.
Principle number 3 says that connecting goes beyond words. So we know that when we're communicating, about 7% of what we're communicating to another person is communicated through our words. 38% is communicated through our tone of voice, and 55% is communicated by our body language. So if we look at this, 93% of what we're communicating is something that we're communicating beyond our words. You know, I remember when I was growing up, my mother used to always say to me, you know what, Susan, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. So, you know, apparently the tone of voice and my body language really had an impact in what she was hearing.
Principle number 4 is that connecting always requires energy. It takes energy to take the initiative, to act with clarity, to be patient, to be selfless, and it requires stamina. What's important is that to really develop a connection, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It takes time, and you will get tired.
So you're saying we have to run those bases many times?
We do, every day.
And principle number 5 says connecting is more than natural talent. Learning to connect with another individual is a learnable skill. And it really is about who we are, what we're willing to sacrifice, what we're willing to do to develop those relationships in order to successfully connect with another person. So maybe we should move on now to 5 connecting practices. So these are things we can actually do. And the 5 connecting practices that we want to share with you are number 1, common ground, number 2, simplicity, number 3, experience, number 4, inspire or inspiration, and number 5, credibility.
Okay, practice number 1, connectors connect on common ground. There are barriers to finding this common ground. They're the assumptions we come to the table with. They're the arrogance that we all come with, knowing and believing that we know best. There's the ability and desire to control the conversation, as well as indifference. But we do have the choices to make ourselves available, to be thoughtful, to listen, to ask questions. How many times have you attended a meeting that seems to get nothing done, or leave at the end wondering what was the purpose of that meeting? This dysfunction prevents us from actually getting to the work that we're there to do. Because of these conflicts surrounding values, vision, and purpose, we are struggling with both process because we have not settled into our common ground.
Interesting. Connecting in practice number 2 is really all about others. It's not about ourselves. So how do we show up? Are we using humor? Are we showing up with an open heart? Are we showing up bringing hope and being hopeful as well as being helpful? We want to connect with others. We want to keep it simple. We want to say it slowly. And most importantly, and very easy to do, we want to have a smile. Are we looking like someone that someone else would want to engage and connect with?
Practice number 3 is to create an experience that everyone enjoys. That involves being interesting. What that means is we need to take responsibility for our listeners' experience. We need to communicate using the words that they're used to hearing. We cannot use acronyms without defining them and speak the language of our work without knowing what their capacity to understand and what they know. We need to capture people's attention right from the start, and we need to say it so that it sticks. It needs to make a point, needs to be meaningful.
Practice number 4 says that connectors inspire people. So it's sort of an equation. It's a combination. If you want to inspire another individual, it's what you know. It's also what people see. We have to walk the walk as leaders and as champions that we're talking, added to what people feel. So what people know, what people see, plus what people feel will create an inspiration in a connected experience.
The final practice is credibility, and that really is the currency that connectors have. And these are some of the questions that are important to know the answers to when we are seeking true connection. Have I connected with myself? Am I comfortable with who I am and what I do? Have I made right my wrongs? Am I accountable? Have I done what I've said I'm going to do? Do I lead like I live? Am I the same person inside and outside of work? Do I tell the truth? Have I made myself vulnerable? In order to be authentic, you have to be vulnerable and be willing to be vulnerable. They come together. Am I treating others with respect and with the respect that I would like to receive? And do I actually deliver the results I say I'm going to do? Credible engagers walk the talk. And this really ties into third base integrity of the engagement RBI.
Okay. Agreed. Are we going to move on now to objective number 3?
We are going to move on now. Story Smart is a process that Susan and I have developed that help participants to develop and tell their own stories. We'd like to introduce you to Story Smart. And before we get there, it's important to remember that one of the most effective connecting tools that we have is a personal story. Our brains are hardwired to communicate with stories. Susan, would you like to give us an example
I would.
Of a smart story?
I would. So I love this quote from Sandra King, who says, the tiny seed knew that in order to grow, it needed to be dropped in the dirt, covered in darkness, and struggled to reach the light. So I want to tell you a little bit about this, this picture here. You know, I do a lot of gardening, and I don't know if any of you have ever tended a garden, but if you have, perhaps you've experienced what I call the battle of the weeds. You know, you pull them out, and then a few days later, it's kind of like the Terminator. They're back. So last summer, I was driving down the road, and I stopped at a red light, and looking to the left, I saw what this looked like a presumed weed standing tall in the sea of asphalt. You know, I must admit my first thought was to jump out of my car, brave the traffic, and run over and pull it out. But instead, I decided to play it safe, and I just snapped this photo. Later on that day, while I was contemplating a post to my social media, sort of condemning the persistence of the weeds and my frustration with my perceived loss of the battle, I began to kind of reflect on this picture. And, you know, that's when it hit me. This weed, you know, not unlike us or many of the children that we nurture and support, is amazingly resilient. Even when covered in dirt and then a hard shell of asphalt, the potential in the seed of this weed struggles to find the light, to find a light. You know, I believe that inside every human being there are seeds of great potential. And we, as parents, caregivers, and providers, have the ability as well as the responsibility to help the seeds in others, and especially the seeds in our children, find light. I know that connection is the tool that will create the cracks in the asphalt, cracks that can let the light in. Building rapport, being service-minded, and then showing up with integrity really can create the conditions for all the seeds of our potential to blossom. As we've said many times today, we know it's not easy to do, although it's easy to say. But although it's hard to do, we're talking about our children, and isn't it so, so worth it that we do that? Would you like to share a story with us, ma'am?
Sure. As you see, here's a bag of rocks. And Carl Perkins wrote, if it weren't for the rocks in its bed, the stream would have no song. We all experience bumps or rocks along the path of our journey. These rocks, though frustrating and sometimes scary, are there to teach us something if we are able to recognize the lesson. A long, long time ago, I was a regular kid in foster care. My experience had been in an orphanage run by nuns and 7 different foster homes. I had no constancy and was very much ungrounded. When I was 10, I entered what would be my last foster home. Of course, I didn't know it at that time. I began to realize that my history was going to be different than others. I probably would not have that home to return to or a grounded place to remember when times got tough. I decided that probably I would not be anywhere for a long period of time, but wanted to have something to help me remember my stops along the way. That's when I started collecting rocks. At every point going forward from that time, I would find a special rock, pick it up, and put it in my pocket. Since I knew I didn't know where I was from or who my parents were, this was a way that I could develop a story, a history, if you will, of where I had begun. These rocks represent my past, my history. Some of my rocks remind me of happy times, and some remind me of difficult and sad times. But each rock represents an important point in my life, a time that was significant. I have had the opportunity to develop my own way of remembering my past. I still carry these rocks with me. Even today, they're in my pocket as we speak. This is my way of saying I was here.
Thank you, Nan. So you see that we have shared two different stories, very different, and storytelling is something that we all do. Storytelling is not just something that we do. Storytelling is really who we are. There are many different types of personal stories, and we know that a personal story often can be a narrative, sort of a chronology of the events in someone's life. And these stories are interesting and can really help us get to know another person better. However, we can also use our experiences to influence others. And this is what we call teaching or persuasive stories. The biggest difference is that a persuasive story also has a significant message that is generally connected to some type of emotion. In our Story Smart workshops, Dan and I, we help storytellers understand the difference between a narrative and a persuasive story, and we also help participants develop and deliver persuasive stories using what we call this SMART story framework. So the S stands for a story needs to be safe. You need to consider who the storyteller is. Are you safe to share that story? Is it okay? Is it something that you have thought about, the why that you're sharing it? We also know that a story needs to be meaningful. To influence or make a teaching point with someone, the story has to have a message or should have some type of message. Stories also should be articulate, which means that they should be efficient. They should be well-written, well-crafted, efficient, with not a lot of extra things that are not necessary to the listener, and they also should be well-practiced. I find it really upsetting when I hear individuals share a story that they haven't thought about before sharing, and they find that they overshare and share very personal information that they cannot take back. It's sort of like the toothpaste in the tube. Once you squeeze it out, it's very hard, or if not impossible, to put it back in. A SMART story also is responsible. Is it your story to tell? How does the story that you're going to tell influence the other individuals that are connected to your life and or connected to that story? And is it teaching? Does it meet the needs of the audience or the listener, and does it send a message that will ask the audience or the listener to do something different or change the way that they think about something? Our stories are us. They are who we are in our heart and soul. If we're going to share them, we want to make certain that they're well thought through before, a very good friend of mine says, before I share my pearl, which I really love. Which this brings us to Simon Sinek's Why, and I love this golden circle because at the center of this circle is the why. And I want you to think about, if you are a provider or even a parent, why do you do for children what you do? Why did you choose to be a parent? Why did you choose to enter this type of work? I ask that question of a lot of people, and more often than not, the answer is because I want to make a difference and I want to help people. But unfortunately, somewhere along the path, many of us lose touch with the heart of that why. We get mired down in the how and the what. And when we become too focused or too heavily focused on process and program, we lose sight of the fact that we are dealing with people. We are dealing with people and children who are at the heart of the why. We can't forget that everything that we do is helping to shape the story of a child. You know, this happens to all of us. We get busy. We get caught up in the day-to-day, and I think sometimes we forget. Nan and I hope that something that we said to you today will help each and every one of us reconnect with our own story, something that reminds us that as champions and leaders, we can not only affect the life of one, but we are also creating the defining story in another person's life.
Defining stories, we all have them. We all need to remember them. So what I would like to do is to issue a call to action to everyone listening today. Everyone has that defining story, and I challenge you to discover yours. Now, there's no requirement that you share your story with anyone else, as long as you know it and return to it when you find yourself in times of stress and frustration. I promise you, it will make a difference in your daily work.
So before we go to comments and questions, we really want to thank the National Early Childhood Family Network. We'd like to thank SAMHSA and the TA Network and the support that we've received from FREDLA. And most importantly, we'd like to thank each and every one of you for sharing your time with us. We are very grateful, and we hope that we've added some value to you in some way today.
Thank you.
Kish? Susan and Ann, that was fantastic. I'm wondering if there are any questions from anyone. I see a couple people are typing, so let's give them a second. Susan and Ann, let me ask you a question. When you talk about telling your story, how do you, and I think, Susan, you referenced this about whose story is it? So often as parents, we tell stories, and often they are very personal things that relate to our children. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts personally are oftentimes you can tell the context of the emotion or of the what you're asking someone to sort of think differently about without giving an awful lot of detail of the exact sort of facts and circumstances that happened during that experience. I also think it's really important to make certain that we know which pieces of the story we're telling where. What I might share in a small, intimate group might be very different than something that I would share as a testimony that's going to be recorded and available on the internet forever and ever. So it's not only looking at what you're sharing, but it's also looking at where you're sharing it. I think that if there's a doubt of how that might impact our children later in life, that although we want to utilize that experience to create change, we also want to make sure that the privacy and the respect of our children is protected as well.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help?
Yeah, that's a perfect. Yeah, and I don't think I introduced myself. I'm Jane Walker from Fredla, and we often tell families as they're telling their stories to remember whose story is it, and that their children have a story, and they have a story, and that we have to be careful and ask permission when we're telling our child's story as well. So, good point. Any other questions anybody has? Tish, can I turn it over to you? You have to come off mute. It's possible that we lost Tish. So I'm just going to keep going since I haven't heard from her. And I, again, want to thank our presenter, Susan Graham from Let's Build It, Dan Arnstein from Creative Arts for Developing Minds for quite a powerful, informative presentation today. The slides are available in the small box on your screen. It's called Honoring One, it says PO. And you can download them right now. As you saw in the chat box, this webinar is being recorded and will be available in about a week or so, and we'll get it out to people. Thank you to the NECFN Steering Committee, who's worked tirelessly this past year. Thanks again to all of you who were able to join us. And I would be remiss if I did not thank the tech team at the University of Maryland National TA Network. Tiara is our go-to person, and she's fantastic. We always thank her. And always to SAMHSA, and particularly Unique Edmonds at Project Launch, whose vision inspired the creation of the National Early Childhood Family Network. Our next webinar is on effective father engagement strategies and lessons learned from Alameda County systems change approaches. That will be May 14th. The login or registration information is right on your screen there, so when you download the slides, you'll be able to see it. And should you need to contact the Early Childhood Family Network, Tish McGinnis is the chair of the steering committee. Tish, are you on now?
I don't know, Jane. Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. I was trying to do it like, I don't know. I'm probably the least technology savvy person around, but my goodness, let me just jump in and say the slide is there for how to contact us, the network. What a wonderful, wonderful webinar. Thank you so much to the University of Maryland. Thank you so much, Fredla, Jane, for all that you have done for us. And, of course, I can't leave out SAMHSA. I know that Unique was on the call, and I'm very thankful for that. But it was a great webinar. And, again, please let us know. And I also, Jane, noticed that in our end here that we need to also ask everybody to please stay on the webinar to be able to hopefully complete a survey.
Correct. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, there's a very short 30-second survey at the end of this. It tells us, gives us feedback and helps us make it better each time. Okay, I think that's all. And we hope you all have a great rest of today, holiday weekend that's coming up, and hope you join us in May. And contact Tish at the network. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, thanks, everybody, and thank you to all of the members of the network that were on this as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.